back in 2018, I was a level 1 certified rugby league match official for the Netherlands Rugby League Bond. That level of accreditation was good, but it wasn't enough to referee certain international fixtures. So the Netherlands Rugby League funded an all expenses paid trip for me and my father to Kharkiv in the Ukraine, where the Rugby League European Federation were hosting level 2 match official courses. The setup there was genuinely outstanding. We had our theory lessons inside a 40,000 capacity stadium and did our practical training in the facilities outside, which had recently been renovated for the Euros 6 years prior. While there, we mingled with a lot of the domestic Ukrainian players and officials and got a sense of the operation they were running. They had 6 men's clubs based in the industrial heart of eastern Ukraine and had programs that were running for both boys and girls. There was a genuinely steadily growing grassroots path of junior Ukrainian rugby league talent. That was pretty surprising to me because at that point, the Netherlands Rugby League had just introduced their 4th men's team and had little to no junior activity whatsoever. What they had set up in Ukraine was genuinely impressive and a model for the rest of Europe to follow. Unfortunately, less than 4 years later, all of that would turn on its head.
As we go to air tonight, there are reports of multiple explosions in the cities of Kiev and Kharkiv after Vladimir Putin authorized the invasion of Ukraine.
Ukraine woke to explosions around the capital, Kiev.
Ukraine is now a nation at war.
It was the same across the country. These pictures from Kharkiv in the east.
An unprovoked war in Europe is now underway.
President Vladimir Putin warning other countries that any attempt to interfere with the Russian action will lead to, quote, consequences they have never seen.
Rugby league has a habit of surviving against the odds across the globe, but there is nothing I have seen that comes close to the struggle, spirit, and sacrifice of Ukrainian rugby league. Now, I could tell this story myself, but as with any story involving a war, the best accounts that you get are those from the front lines. And when it comes to Ukrainian Rugby League's battle for survival, there's not many better people to talk to than their national team head coach. So I sat down for a call with Dan Beardshaw, the man in charge of the national team, to tell their story. So I'm here with the head coach of the Ukrainian National Rugby League team, and I was just wondering, because in International Rugby League, everyone has their own story of how they got involved. How did you get involved with Ukrainian Rugby League of all competitions?
To be honest, I'm a massive fan of International Rugby League, developing nations. Personally, I think I've achieved a lot, traveled the world because of the game, and just being there and seeing the sort of connections that those players are getting together and just that love of the game, especially these minor, smaller nations that are doing it for the love. They're putting the work in, the training and volunteering their time just because of the love of the game. They've got no dreams of aspirations of becoming professionals. Watching those guys play and perform is just a bit of inspiration. Myself, 2-3 years ago, there was a call from Artur Matverzian wanting, because of the war and the invasion, a lot of their players are either involved in the military and in defending Ukraine. They were calling for support for players of Ukrainian heritage. So I got in touch and said, listen, what can I do? What can I do to help? After about 6 months, a year, I was asked, I'm pretty honored to be offered the opportunity to be the head coach. That was sort of 2.5 years ago. And then that leads us to where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of story that as an International Rugby League fan, I love. I mean, so many fans here in Australia who, with all due respect, would have no clue that rugby league exists in a country like Ukraine and that they have a functioning, national side. As I've mentioned, I've been to Ukraine before and was exposed to their rugby league infrastructure that they had at the time. That was about 6 years ago. I was wondering, given the war and the difficulties of players who are enlisted soldiers who do go to the front line, how much has it been a struggle to maintain that rugby league infrastructure, and what does it sort of look like, I suppose, nowadays?
Well, speaking to Artur's very, very good at what he does. He's very impressive. One of the things that he really wanted to do before the war was use the best facilities possible. So he was approaching stadiums and playing games in stadiums that were built for the European soccer. So you got these international stadiums of 15, 20, 25,000. There are a couple on the Eastern Front Line that were used and unfortunately have been destroyed. So a lot of what the domestic players and staff have to do is move to that western side. So instead of everybody having their home base and the home and away fixtures, it's kind of changed to we have to come together, one main stadium. It is pretty sad that every so often that we'll see these facilities just being destroyed. Even there was a photos that were sent into our group chat of the running track with big holes, like where the explosions have come and destroyed not just the facilities, but the fields and the running tracks and even the clubhouses of junior clubs. Yeah, so it's pretty sad that these things are happening, not just attacking military infrastructure. Even yesterday, they were in Kharkiv, where a lot of our players are from. The hospital was hit by missiles, and it is sad to see these things happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, God, no, and I think it's an incredibly inspiring story that rugby league has continued to survive in spite of all that adversity. You spoke earlier about the love that the people involved with Ukrainian Rugby League have for the sport, and it's such a testament to their love for the game that they've been able to continue it going in spite of all this adversity. My next question was going to be about the balance between heritage players and domestic players for your national side in a time like this. Has that been a balance that's been impacted by the fact that perhaps you need to rely more on heritage guys because fewer domestic players are available for selection? Would you say that's the case?
Yes and no. We have still 6 to 8 clubs that are taking part in men's. Before the war, they had 10 clubs, 29 teams, and unfortunately, as we say, that it's shrunk because of what's going on and the struggles. We have had a good growth of juniors, some great volunteers out there. Well, this weekend coming, I think there's a 5-team girls touch rugby league competition coming on for under 17s. We've got under 12s, under 14s, under 16s, and there's plenty of footage out there of these kids training and playing games, and from tackle to tag. Really, it's a great distraction for a lot of these young people. So there is the growth there despite what's going on. And that's something that, coming from where we are in Australia and England, the media has moved away from this war. And a few people even asked yesterday about one of my friends back home, oh, is the war still going? I thought it finished, because of that media attention has gone. In regards to the heritage players, we've really put an onus on using these guys to develop what's going across there, not just bring them in, play a few games, see you later, see you next year. We've had such a huge connection. We've really lent on our heritage players to pass on what they know, pass on those little details, pass on how to coach, or pass on that information to then take them away. It's something that we've really spent time on, that it's not just Australian players or English players or whoever. You're Ukrainian, so our calls and how we communicate on the field is in Ukrainian.
Yeah, wow.
Has to be. It is a Ukrainian side, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the long term, not just, hey, you guys come in for 1 or 2 games, see you later, we'll bring in the next ones. It's how we can pass this information on, how we can grow the competition, how we can increase the standard.
I gotta say, sorry, I sort of interrupted you earlier, but that thing about communicating in Ukrainian on field, that is super cool, super commendable as well. I remember, God, it must have been about 10 years ago now, I was refereeing a game between the Netherlands and Sweden, and literally every Swedish player just had the most rusted on Australian accent you could possibly imagine. And I was thinking at the time, like, what's the point of this? This isn't really Sweden. Like, you know, what are we really doing here? So you deserve a lot of credit, I think, for putting that in place. That's something of an abnormality in the international game. And, you know, while ideally perhaps you'd have full, 17s full of domestic players, I think in reality the best thing is to have a bit of a balance between the domestic and the heritage in order to, as you say, get that sort of experience and exposure and let it trickle down towards the domestic clubs.
It's like we've seen domestic teams earn the right to get to the World Cup, and then next thing they fill the squad full of heritage, and these players are thinking, well, what's the point? Why are we doing this when we do all the hard work, and then these other people who don't really understand our culture or what sacrifices have been made, and then they sort of leave the game. And we've seen these competitions and organizations be successful, and then next thing they just disappear off the face of the planet. And I think that's something that we've really tried to strike an onus on, that we're doing this to continue that domestic competition. We've had players who, once the conflict's over, they want to go into camp. The facilities and the planning's already there. We just need that war to finish. And yeah, our players are being continuously want to visit what's going on over there afterwards and help rebuild that game.
I did want to ask actually about a player who you mentioned earlier, Jet Cleary. He's obviously a player who is known here in Australia primarily because of his brother and his father. How on earth did you convince him to go from playing in front of 12,000 people at Sydney Olympic Park one week to playing at Rugby Club Octopus in the Netherlands, which by the way is the greatest venue name I have ever heard of, in front of a few hundred people the following week? Like, how does that I guess, functionally come about?
We've been in contact with players from the start. He was meant to play for us when he was playing under 18s at Penrith, but he had a shoulder injury. And this shows you what our Heritage boys are like. He actually ran water for us that day, and he's been in touch with us regularly. And that's something that, speaking to his grandma, his dad, his brother, the rest of his family, he's really wanted to represent his heritage and understand. And we want these players to learn, not just, we don't just turn up for training. We talk about what it means to be Ukrainian, and that bonds our players very, very closely. So he was in New Zealand, had to fly to Australia for the New South Wales Cup final, then flew back to New Zealand, then flew back to Sydney, finished that game, flew back to New Zealand again, flew back to Sydney to then travel to us. So within that week, there was a lot of sacrifice and there's a lot of commitment to the cause, not just to the game, but he knew what it meant, and he was spent a lot of time traveling just so it could happen. That's something that we want to thank the Warriors for, that he's contracted to them, but they're using this as an opportunity for him to develop his leadership skills.
Geez, it's incredibly commendable that he's willing to fly around and travel that much just to, do this for the game of rugby league. I mean, in terms of Australia, like there'd be genuinely no negative ramifications here in terms of media if he were to not represent Ukraine. And in fact, there's been, I would say, quite little publicity about him doing it. So he's literally just doing this out of love for the game.
Yeah, and I think that shows not just the strength of character of him, but a lot of our boys have sacrificed a lot to come out here. Myself, I've got a 6-month-old baby and wife at home. There's a lot of sacrifice going on, but we talk about our sacrifices, but then you compare it to the domestic boy sacrifices. You then go, okay, now that puts that into context. Just 2 weeks ago, one of our players, ex-players of the national side who plays domestically for Kharkiv Legion 13, was killed last year. One of our players, 4 or 5 days before the competition, his mother was killed in a rocket attack on her apartment. So you think about the struggles that we have. Yeah, there's nothing compared to what the domestic boys have to go through.
Now, I want to stop the interview right there because this part hit me like a freight train, and I wanted to learn more about it. I found an article in The Guardian from October last year talking about a centre, Vitaly Puchkov, who lined up to play against France less than 2 weeks after his mother was killed by a missile strike to her apartment. Not only would that have been weighing an incredible amount on Puchkov's mind, but also those of his teammates who had left their own families behind in Ukraine. Captain Alexander Skorbach spoke pre-game about the fact that their families back in Ukraine might be in danger and how it was, quote, very difficult not to pay attention to this. 6 of the Ukrainian players who played that day were enlisted soldiers who had been given special permissions to leave the front lines in order to represent their nation at rugby league. Players who had left behind their brothers in arms at the front line of a war to go and play the game, which is yet another massive mental and emotional barrier to overcome when lining up to play rugby league. I'll speak a bit more about that sacrifice later, but I just thought it was worth touching on here. Back to the interview. To round off, and thank you for this chat, by the way, it's been genuinely outstanding and eye-opening. What can a viewer in Australia or say New Zealand or England do to support what you guys are doing over there for Ukrainian Rugby League?
I think one of the things at the moment is our raffle, which we've got 4 signed jerseys from Cronulla Sharks, Penrith Panthers, Gold Coast Titans, New Zealand Warriors. So we're actively promoting that to try and raise funds to assist with what we're doing here. In regards to domestically, again, getting that sort of hopefully media attention, sharing, liking everything we do on our socials. We're very, very active. There's currently a lot of videos being put together and shared on social media about what we're doing. Just reaching out and sending the messages to the organization going, hey, we are making comments. Hey, we're really impressed with what you're doing. As always, like anything, if kit could be sent or even balls or footy boots and things like that, because that sort of things are stopped, have been sort of sold and things like that in the country. That's a lot of what we can do. Even just recently, IMG have sold the Super League Grand Final, the Ashes games, to Ukrainian television. Most recently this year, the Ukrainian Super League, 9s and full-time squad, 13-a-side squads, their games were streamed on satellite television in Ukraine and with some really, really good numbers. So it's just about continuing that that exposure. But the main thing that we want to do is thank the defenders of Ukraine. They allow our players to travel. As I say, our players have to have permission from the government and the organizations to leave the country. Military-aged males over the age of 18 cannot leave Ukraine unless exceptional circumstances like this. So we want to thank, obviously, all the defenders. That's the main thing that we want to thank.
I remember talking at the end of my Netherlands Rugby League video about the amount of sacrifice in terms of time and effort that those people put in out of nothing but love for the game. But while that absolutely does deserve credit and respect, making this video has opened my mind up to an entire new level of sacrifice. The spirit they're showing in Ukraine is immense. I found another article talking about the solace and community that wounded soldiers are finding in the unfortunately ever-growing Ukrainian wheelchair rugby league competition. Like, that is genuinely emotional stuff. Taking a totally devastating human experience and turning it into an opportunity for camaraderie. Dan said it himself, these are players and staff with no professional ambitions. They just want to play and grow the game against all the odds of a literal global superpower invading their country. These are the harrowing stories that are taking place across our game worldwide, and with all due respect to legacy media in this country, they are instead choosing to report on 10 players who can expect the biggest pay rises come November 1. Where Chanel Harris-Tavita is going to end up in 2027. What colour undies Reece Walsh put on this morning. It shouldn't be me who has to do this. I'm a kid who makes YouTube videos from his university dorm room. But here we are. And if there are members of the mainstream media watching with the financial backing and resources of legacy media institutions, have a look at the literal thousands of people who have watched this video and tell me that there is no interest in these stories coming out. These stories deserve to be told, and you guys are the people who have the resources to do it. Anyway, I will leave it there. If you are new here and you want to support this kind of journalism, we're trying to hit 10K by the end of the year on YouTube, and your help with that would be massively appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.